After this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. It's just a little background of what's happening now in chapter 40. You may remember in 39, Joseph got caught in a tight spot. False accusations were made that he took or tried to take advantage of Potiphar's wife, and he was placed in prison. Now, we're going to kind of hit where we are and what's happening. Joseph's in prison, and we don't know the offense, but the chief cupbearer and the chief baker are placed in the same prison. Verse 1. I wanted to make sure I got it right. No, it's verse 3. And Pharaoh put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. I want to throw a pop quiz, but I won't do it. You see, we know who the captain of the guard is. We learned that in the previous chapter, in chapter 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. You see, the Pharaoh has put the chief cupbearer and the baker in prison with Joseph, and this prison is a building attached to Potiphar's home. Joseph hasn't gone far. We know nothing of the offense that the cupbearer or the baker did. We just know that they did something to displease Pharaoh. So they find themselves in prison. They find themselves being cared for by Joseph, because the captain of the guard, Potiphar, has appointed Joseph to be with them and to take care of them. You see, Joseph still seems to have some favor in Potiphar's eyes. But if we look real detailed at the rest of the story, this story is purely about the destiny of Joseph. Now, it takes us a while to get there, but that's where we head. And picking up in verse 5. And one night, they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please, tell them to me." These few verses are very telling. The first thing that we gather is the cupbearer, the cupbearer and the baker have dreams. They wake up the next morning, just not right. They're struggling. They're downcast. They're nervous. They're worried. But you notice, they're not worried because they're incarcerated. They say nothing about that. Their concern is they had this dream and no one can tell them what it means. We haven't been told the dream yet, but they're struggling. They know there has to be some meaning behind it, but there are no dream interpreters there in prison. If only they were still in their positions, they could go to the king of Egypt's dream interpreters and find it out. But Joseph is there. Joseph knows a little bit about dreams. Remember a long time ago? Back when he was still in Canaan? He dreamed that the sun and the moon and all the stars bowed down to him. While he didn't interpret it, it seemed that his brothers and his dad did. But you know what's really important for us to realize? Here in these verses from 5 to 8, Joseph does not put himself up. He doesn't brag on himself. He doesn't say, I got this. I can tell you what it means. You see what he did? For isn't the interpreter of all dreams God? He took a normal conversation and he moved it to bring God into the midst of it. To hear them say, well, yes, God would be able to answer our dream. And God's with Joseph. And Joseph is in prison with the cupbearer and the baker. He was able to recognize their struggle. Just coming in, he saw that their faces were down. Man, this is just packed with how we as believers should live. We can break it down that God gives each of us gifts. Now, yours might not be dream interpretation. Maybe it's singing. Maybe it's instruments. Maybe you just have a heart to talk to God and you're a prayer warrior. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe you've been gifted in ways that you're not quite sure yet how to use it to the glory of God, but you've been gifted just as Joseph was. Another thing we should learn and we should live like, you notice he just walks in and he can tell there's something wrong with these two. Church, are you close enough to others here and out in our world that you can determine and distinguish almost immediately something's not right in that life? Have we gotten to know one another well enough? And you have to appreciate how Joseph can take a normal conversation and direct it towards God. And then Joseph goes that extra step and he says, please, tell your dreams to me. And we pick up in verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, In my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed them in the cup in Pharaoh's hand. I do not dream like this. My dreams are all psychedelic. My dreams have no common thread. But here we see the cupbearer. He's dreaming of branches. He's dreaming of fruit beginning to bud, and they go from bud to blossoming to clusters fully ripened, and he squeezes them. He doesn't just squeeze them, he squeezes them into Pharaoh's own cup. If you look really carefully and you tear these verses apart, you notice everything's happening in threes. 3 branches. There are 3 verbs that go along with the grapes. Budded, shot, ripened. Pharaoh is mentioned 3 times. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you. And please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Joseph doesn't have to think about it. God's presence is with him, and he immediately gives the chief cupbearer the interpretation. Can you imagine the joy? In 3 days, Pharaoh's going to release you. You will be lifted up back to your position. And you will serve the king of Egypt again. Can you imagine the excitement? But Joseph has a request. And it's a request, it's not a command. Only remember me. When these things come to be and you assume your position of authority again, just remember me to Pharaoh. And that'll get me out of this prison. That'll get me out of this place. And he tells him a little about his story. See, I was kidnapped. I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. Notice how he says, I serve a different God than you without saying it. This isn't the time for division. Just know I'm a foreigner. I don't really belong here. Even within Egypt. And I've done nothing that they should put me here in prison. I don't belong in this prison either. Crazy things have happened. So please, when you get out, tell Pharaoh about me. I don't know about you, But this seems like a strange request. I mean, it's 3 days. How in the world could he forget about Joseph? 3 days. Now, I get tell Pharaoh about me because that could be an oversight. Only remember me. Joseph realizes he needs others. Even with the presence of God in his life, with God being with him, he recognizes that to be all that we can be in God's kingdom, we need others. We're not in this journey by ourselves. And more times than not, we need those that we would least expect needing. Verse 16. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, you gotta love that. The baker just hangs back for a while. He listens to how it goes. I like the interpretation of that dream. Okay, Joseph, here's my story. I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head. And in the innermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Again, there's no pause. God is with Joseph. God is the interpreter of all dreams. As soon as the baker is done telling his dream, Joseph responds. 3 days. Kind of wonder if the baker wouldn't have liked to just remain silent and not say anything. And then we get to the day, verse 20. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, imagine that. He made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hands. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Things come to pass exactly as Joseph had said. On the 3rd day, turns out it's Pharaoh's birthday. Can you imagine the spectacular? Because, I mean, he's the king of Egypt. It's going to be a big feast. I'm sure it would be enjoyable. I'm sure there are many people sharing in that day. And the cupbearer and the baker are brought to him. It's his birthday. And he looks at the cupbearer. And he restores him. We're not told exactly how he does it. We're not told the words, but I imagine it in my head is something like, welcome back home. Your position is restored. Now get to it, because there are a lot of guests here. And it's time for a toast. And the baker's there. He's not quite as lucky. He gets hanged. You know, when we look here at chapter 40, there are a lot of things that are foreshadowed a few thousand years later. Verse 14, Joseph talking to the cupbearer. When you come back into your authority, cupbearer, remember me. Exactly the same words that a thief on a cross would say to Jesus in a few thousand years. Interesting, the request was that, remember me, that you might get me out of here and I can return to living life outside of prison walls. Not chained with imprisonment, but a free man again. And if you remember a few thousand years, Jesus would respond to the thief, today you will be with me in paradise. Your sins will be forgiven you. And you'll be alive in a way you never experienced before. The foreshadowing doesn't end there. Right before Jesus made that proclamation, when he was brought back into Jerusalem from the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives, there was a time of celebration going on. No, it wasn't Caesar's birthday, but it was Passover. There were celebrations, there was excitement. And even then, the governor had established a tradition that on Passover he would have 2 prisoners brought to him. And he would free one, give a full pardon of release. And the other would pay for his crime. The cupbearer gets restored to the life he knew. The baker gets hanged. Pontius Pilate would look out in the crowd and say, whom do you want? Barabbas or Jesus? And the crowd yelled for Barabbas. Pontius Pilate utterly amazed, because one is a barbarian, one is a terrorist, and one, he can't find any guilt in. And he says, what shall I do then with Jesus? Crucify him. Now, from that darkest moment of history, something incredibly miraculous and wonderful came from it. Jesus' death brought forgiveness. It brought salvation. And it provided life to every human being that would ever live, provided they placed their trust in Him. All the cupbearer needs to do is remember Joseph. Verse 23 dashes our hopes, at least momentarily. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. I want you to think about Joseph's life for a minute. As chapter 40 comes to a close, here is the state of mind of Joseph. I was just doing what Dad told me to. Go down and check on your brothers. And I got there, and they threw me in a pit. They took my coat, and then they sold me to Midianites who brought me to Egypt and sold me into slavery. That's pretty bad. But then, once in Egypt, he just does what his master Potiphar says. He takes care of the house. He takes care of all the arrangements. Everything's just going off like clockwork. Things are good. He recognizes that Joseph is capable. And then Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him of something, and he ends up in prison. And now, he's forgotten by the only human that would have Pharaoh's ear to get him out. And yet, the entire time, we don't hear Joseph whining. We don't see Joseph throwing a temper tantrum. We don't see Joseph having a pity party for himself. And if ever someone had a just cause to have a pity party, being sold into slavery by your family, getting thrown in prison for no fault of your own, and being utterly forgotten after 3 days, you make a pretty good case. But the only other thing that Joseph knows is the presence of God is with him. Let me repeat that. God's presence is with him. And that trumps every other circumstance. Joseph may be forgotten by humans, but God knows him. God's there. Joseph has trusted in God multiple times, and each and every time, God provides a way. You see, chapter 40 really isn't about the baker. Thank goodness, because the story's over pretty quick. It's not really about the cupbearer. While he plays a role in it, it's just a side character. It's all about Joseph's destiny while trusting in God. I've often heard people say the safest place to be is in the center of God's will, and we like to say it when the center of God's will is uncomfortable. We like it even more for someone else. Joseph was in the center of God's will. He did no evil. He didn't complain. He merely kept trusting. I am going to ask you an unfair question, but it is one that requires your response. Not out loud, not even perhaps giving the answer to your spouse, but this is a question between you and God. Do you trust Him? And let's double down. How much do you trust Him? Joseph trusted Him with his whole life. Somehow, through all of this, I can hear Joseph praying, God, do with me as you want, just glorify your name. And here's the thing, God was doing what He wanted. He was making an impact on a lot of people through the unfavorable circumstances in Joseph's life. If our trust is deep in Christ, then we can celebrate when the circumstances are difficult. If our trust rests completely on God Himself and not on us, not on our talents, not on others around us, no matter how much we care for them and how much they care for us, we know there's a way forward that glorifies God. But what if I'm forgotten? God won't forget you. But can I defend myself? Can I stand up and just tell everyone I'm innocent and she's a rotten woman for lying? What glory does God see in that? Yeah, you feel better for a minute. You lose so much more. Church, our world is looking for answers. Our world is looking for companionship. Our world is looking for acceptance. I am going to be honest with you. We humans are fickle. We give our acceptance conditionally. Yeah, you're great, you're wonderful, until you're not. And you could do something as crazy as cut your hair, and all of a sudden you're out of favor with folks. You bought the wrong kind of car. You carry the wrong cell phone. God loves you unconditionally. Hear that? It's crazy. There is nothing you can do to stop God from loving you. And He desires for you to love Him too. I mean, it shouldn't take much. If He cares that much about us, it should be easy. It should be simple. We tend to trust as far as we can throw people. As long as I have control, as long as I understand what's going on, I can trust you. God doesn't work that way. Sometimes God sends you to the dungeon that His name would be glorified through the salvation of others. Oh, our generation needs Josephs, or Josephinas, as the case may be. Are you willing to be this kind of average Joe?